Everyone knows the story of Steve Jobs, the visionary in the black turtleneck who conjured impossible products out of thin air and built Apple into a global icon. His genius was undeniable, his legacy immortal. But when he was gone, the world held its breath. Taking his place was a man who couldn't have been more different. Not a product visionary, not a showman. He was Tim Cook, the quiet, methodical operations guy. The world's most exciting company was now being run by, as the critics whispered, a mere logistics expert. Pundits predicted the magic was gone. Apple, they said, was destined to become the next Sony, a giant that would slowly fade into irrelevance. But they were spectacularly wrong, because what they dismissed as boring, what they overlooked as simple logistics, was actually Apple's secret weapon. This is the story of how Tim Cook's mastery of the supply chain, supercharged by a continuous, multi-billion-dollar bet, didn't just save Apple. It forged an empire more powerful and more profitable than even Jobs might have imagined. This is the story of the decision that cemented Tim Cook's legacy. Not as the next Steve Jobs, but as a strategic genius in his own right. Section 1. The Problem. A World Without Job. To understand what Tim Cook accomplished, we have to go back to August 2011. Steve Jobs, his health failing, officially resigned as CEO. The moment the news broke, a wave of uncertainty washed over Silicon Valley and Wall Street. While the company's stock proved resilient after some initial volatility, the real question was much deeper. It wasn't just what's next for Apple. It was, is there an Apple without Steve Jobs? Jobs was the soul of the company. He was the product guru, the master marketer, the ultimate decision maker. The press loved the narrative of the technocrat versus the visionary. They praised Cook for his operational talent, but openly questioned if a supply chain expert could lead a company built on creativity and world-changing innovation. The pressure was immense. Cook wasn't just stepping into a CEO role. He was inheriting a legacy that felt impossible to uphold, let alone build upon. The world saw Apple at a precipice. Without its visionary founder, how could it possibly keep dominating? The answer lay in a strategy that had been quietly taking shape for over a decade. A strategy that Cook was about to elevate into the central pillar of Apple's power. Section 2. The Cook Philosophy, the Gospel of Inventory. Before he was CEO, Tim Cook was Apple's master of operations. When Jobs recruited him from Compaq in 1998, Apple's manufacturing was a total mess. The company was bleeding money, and a big reason was its chaotic and inefficient supply chain. It was holding months of unsold products on its books, a cardinal sin in the fast-moving tech industry. Cook came in with a simple yet brutal philosophy. He famously called inventory fundamentally evil. He compared it to a dairy product. If it sits on the shelf for too long, it spoils. In an industry where a competitor's new phone can make your stock obsolete overnight, holding on to inventory was like holding a ticking time bomb. His mission was clear: tear down the old system. He shut down factories and warehouses around the world, shifting to a model of outsourcing to contract manufacturers. He dramatically consolidated the number of key component suppliers from over 100 to a much smaller, more focused group, forcing them to compete fiercely for Apple's business. The results were astonishing. Over the next few years, inventory on hand was slashed from months down to mere days. He had transformed Apple's operations from a liability into a lean, ruthlessly efficient machine. This wasn't just housekeeping. It was the creation of a foundational advantage. He had proven his mastery long before taking the top job. But now, as CEO, he had the power to weaponize it. Section 3. The Climax. The Multi-Billion-Dollar Gambit. As CEO, Tim Cook didn't just continue his old strategy. He placed a colossal, multi-billion-dollar bet on it. This wasn't a single check written in a boardroom, but a systematic, aggressive escalation of a tactic he had pioneered. The strategy was audacious. Take Apple's enormous and growing cash pile and use it to prepay for critical components, sometimes years in advance. While competitors were fighting for parts on the open market, Cook was quietly making deals to secure huge portions of the future, manufacturing capacity for the world's most advanced technologies. We're talking about the best flash memory for storage, the cutting-edge processors from partners like TSMC, and the high-resolution displays that would define the next generation of iPhones and iPads, this was a massive risk. Apple was tying up billions of dollars in capital on parts for products that were still on the drawing board. If a product was delayed or canceled, or if a new technology didn't pan out, Apple could lose a fortune. But Cook understood something profound. In high-tech manufacturing, securing the supply chain wasn't a defensive move. It was the ultimate offensive weapon. This long-running practice of making massive prepayments for long-term supply was Apple's quiet superpower. While other tech companies made similar agreements, no one did it with the same scale and relentless precision as Apple under Cook. He wasn't just buying parts, he was buying certainty. He was buying the future. Section 4, the resolution, how it forged an empire. The consequences of this strategy were devastating for Apple's competitors and transformative for Apple itself. It created an operational dominance that gave Apple a massive competitive advantage. First, it created scarcity for everyone else. By locking up a huge supply of the world's most advanced components, Apple often left its competitors scrambling. When a new iPhone was set to launch, rivals might find that the best screens, the fastest memory, or the most efficient processors were simply unavailable in the quantities they needed. This meant they were often forced to use second-best components or face crippling delays, ensuring their products could feel a generation behind right out of the gate. Second, it became a profit-generating machine. By negotiating and locking in prices for components well in advance, Apple helped cushion itself from the volatile price swings and shortages that plagued the rest of the industry. This gave them more predictable costs and protected their famously high profit margins. That immense profitability, in turn, fueled a virtuous cycle. It generated the cash that allowed them to make even bigger and bolder supply deals, further cementing their advantage. Third, and most importantly, it enabled innovation at an unprecedented scale. This bedrock of supply chain certainty was a critical factor in the spectacular growth of the iPhone. It allowed Apple to plan massive global launches and scale up production to record-breaking levels that would have been impossible otherwise. This operational fortress was also the launchpad for entirely new product categories. The Apple Watch and AirPods weren't just feats of design. They were miracles of miniaturization. Cook could greenlight these ambitious projects with confidence, knowing that the complex, custom-designed components they required would be available for Apple in the vast quantities needed. The supply chain wasn't just supporting innovation, it was actively enabling it. Section 5, the legacy, from operator to visionary. The numbers tell a story of breathtaking success. When Tim Cook took over as CEO in August 2011, Apple's market capitalization was around $350 billion. By August 2020, it had soared past the $2 trillion mark and has since surpassed $3 trillion. Under his leadership, the company's revenue and profits more than doubled in his first 9 years. The pundits who dismissed him as a logistics guy had completely missed the point. His operational genius was his vision. It was a different kind of vision from Steve Jobs's, but it was no less impactful. Jobs's genius was to create a product so beautiful you had to have it. Cook's genius was to build an operational and financial fortress so powerful that Apple was in the best position to build and deliver that product to the entire world at immense scale and with staggering profitability. He transformed the boring back end of the business, procurement, logistics, supplier relationships, into Apple's primary competitive advantage. This foundation of operational excellence generated the massive cash flow that helped fund the company's pivot into services. Like Apple Music and iCloud, it provided the resources for the multi-billion-dollar R&D that fueled the Apple Silicon transition, a project whose roots go back to the Jobs era, but which has given Apple another monumental advantage under Cook. The $1 billion decision wasn't a single check. It was a strategic mindset executed relentlessly to pour billions into securing the building blocks of the future. It was a decision to make the supply chain not just a part of the business, but the heart of it. The story of Tim Cook is a powerful lesson that game-changing innovation isn't always about a flashy new product. Sometimes it's about a brilliant strategy working silently in the background. If you want to understand more about the hidden forces and strategic thinking behind the world's most successful companies. Make sure to subscribe for more stories like this one. In the end, Tim Cook never tried to be the next Steve Jobs. He didn't have to be. He was exactly what Apple needed to evolve. While Jobs was the revolutionary who launched the rocket, Cook was the master architect who built the launch pad, the fuel depots, and the global infrastructure that allowed that rocket to reach galaxies of success no one thought possible. He proved that a leader who combines analytical rigor with long-term, strategic vision can be just as transformative as a charismatic innovator. He took the engine that Jobs built and turned it into an empire. The world saw a logistics expert, a caretaker. What they got was Apple's secret weapon, a quiet visionary whose mastery of the boring stuff became one of the most revolutionary business strategies of the 21st century.